Imagine you knew someone who made really nice suits, and one day they made a suit for you. You heard about their ability to make suits well. They'd made them for all your friends and they really liked them. And this one they made for you without even being asked. You try it on and you realise it's exactly the suit you've always wanted. It's the right colour, it's the right shape, it's the right material, and the shoes fit you perfectly. Your friend asks, do you love the suit they made? And your first instinct is to say, yes, it's perfect. But then when you walk around in it a bit, make sure that it fits properly, you notice some stuff. The jacket's a little tight on the shoulders, which makes moving around in it uncomfortable. The shirt bags in the wrong place and makes you look fat. And the shoes are too left feet. You bend down to do up the laces, and you hear the material under the armpit tear. A button comes off. When you go to put your phone in your pocket, you realise it's too small. Your friend asks you again, do you love the suit they made for you? And part of you still wants to say yes, because they made it for you, to your exact specifications, without even being asked. But while you do want to say you love it, and you tell your friend that you're grateful for them making it for you, there's a little voice in your head that's always asking you, am I lying to them? Am I lying to myself? Do I love this suit? Do I really love this suit? Or do I just love the idea of this suit? Welcome, friends and foes, survivors and killers. Let's talk about the Skull Merchant. With the Tools of Torment chapter on its way to live servers at the time of writing, everyone's waiting with bated breath to see what behaviour does with the pretty much universally negative feedback this chapter's release has brought. The Skull Merchant's power is comically weak, her character design has been lambasted as shameless fan service, and even things like her animations and chase music have been the subject of serious criticism. However, I've noticed a distinct lack of actual constructive criticism. A lot of people just saying this is bad, and almost nobody suggesting how to actually fix it, or even going into much detail as to why certain things don't work. I've already covered my thoughts on her power and what I do to tweak it in a prior video, but now's the one you've all been waiting for. My thoughts on the Skull Merchant's lore and design. And just like everything else about this character, I like it probably more than most, and I fully expect to get some flack for that. My enthusiasm for killers like Twins, Pinhead and Artist have demonstrated to me that liking things that the wider community does not means you get a lot of shit for it, and a lot of discussions will quickly sour into bad faith shit-slinging. And here's where my contributions might make things a little interesting, because now I know exactly how everybody felt 9 months ago, when Project W came out and everyone told me to shut the fuck up about how much I hated Wesker. Because much like how Wesker was just what Doctor ordered for a lot of Resident Evil fans, a character like the Skull Merchant was the perfect idea of what I have literally always wanted for Dead by Daylight. A strategic map control killer whose power gives you information and stealth and a bit of lethality, and just tells you to get the job done, plays perfectly into my love of macro play intensive killers who trade straight up lethality for utility like Plague, Twins and Pinhead. But that idea has been somewhat compromised by its implementation. I talked about that in my last video on her. The same goes for the Skull Merchant's lore and design. On paper, Adriana Imai should be quite literally my favourite thing in Dead by Daylight, but some strange choices I think prevent her from reaching her full potential, and to fully explore what went wrong and what we could have gotten, we need to start at the beginning and look at who the Skull Merchant is as a character, and the kind of character that with better writing she could so easily have become. Adriana Imai was born in Brazil to a Japanese father, Saita Imai, who had moved from Japan to Fortaleza on Brazil's northern coast. He moved because he wanted a new life far from where he grew up in Hokkaido, where he could nurture his skills as a manga artist. And into that life soon came Belinda, a manager of a local jazz club with whom he began a romantic relationship. This story follows Adriana's life all the way from before she was even born to her taking by the entity, and even at a young age, she showed both enterprising talent and a particular proclivity for violence. But while she seemed to excel in academic studies, her home life was not so smooth. Her father's job at a cannery, combined with his artistic passion for manga, left him little time to be with his daughter, but he nevertheless made the time to share his work and that left a profound impact on young Adriana. When her father lost his job at the cannery and found a small local publishing house to take up his manga, Adi Valente, Adriana resolved to try and bring some money into the house by starting a website all about the Brazilian manga scene. She wasn't really a writer, more of a talent manager, who exhibited other people's writing by paying them in, exposure. Like every other tight-fisted shitbag who pays their employees in exposure, Adriana quickly started to turn a profit. And when she sold the site, she went to present her family with her newfound earnings, only to find her father gone from the house and from her life, with only his unpublished manuscripts left behind. This departure, and the manuscript site had left in his place, would go on to shape the rest of Adriana's life. As she clawed her way up the world of business and investment, she displayed gradually escalating levels of corporate callousness, buying out companies to replace their workforce with cheap, non-unionised staff and sell it off at a profit or moving on to the next one. Hey, is it just me who's getting this weird sense of deja vu, like they've seen this before? Her business acumen was as peerless as it was ruthless, but before long she found her path to success blocked by an obstinate pair of board members at a real estate firm, blocking her acquisition of the company after they cottoned on that the rich lady with a history of effectively dismantling every company she touched might not actually have their best interests at heart. Yeah, actually, this is definitely starting to ring a bell somewhere. Can't quite put my finger on it though. To remove this little spanner in the works, Adriana decided to cut out the middleman, literally, by luring the two holdouts to an alpine resort in Switzerland, where she tracked them down with a prototype drone that she apparently got from somewhere, before killing them quietly. With the blood of her corporate rivals literally staining her hands, Adriana had a realization. Killing made her feel alive, and it resulted in the acquisition of their company unimpeded. The rest of her life before the entity took her followed more or less this formula. She scouted out a company for acquisition, surgically removed any opposition that cropped up, and revelled in both the financial rewards and the thrill of the hunt. But on one of these hunts, Adriana was confronted by something unthinkable. Witnesses. Dalita and Hanato Lyra, a pair of siblings who were kite fighting near the airfield she'd chosen as her hunting ground, crashed a kite into one of her drones. And before she could deal with the pair of young upstarts, a thick fog began to descend. And that's how the entity claimed Adriana Imai for its own. If you just heard this summary without actually reading the lore for yourself, you might find yourself wondering, hey, this story sounds okay. Why are so many people big mad about it? But you'll probably realise why when you actually read the story, because to say it's got some rough edges might be putting it lightly. When you read the story for the first time, you'll notice two distinct feelings as you chew through it. There'll be some parts that will make you go, damn, maybe this character's kinda cool actually. And others will make you wonder why on earth you're reading the story in the first place. You won't know until you read it. It's like Schrodinger's backstory. If you look at her story broadly, the trajectory it takes is pretty solid. It shows us how the brutal and sadistic skull merchant got started in the mean world of business while going a little deeper into her relationship with her father that left her jaded and bitter upon his departure. But it can be hard to bear this trajectory in mind while reading it, because the pacing and what the story chooses to focus on makes it a very difficult read at times. The story is absolutely gargantuan. It is properly long. And you can really feel that length at the very start when huge amounts of time is spent covering her father's ambition as a manga artist. I can certainly see why a lot of time is spent with him. He's clearly set up to be a major inspiration for his daughter's future alter ego as a skull merchant, especially because of the whole what's reality in one world is fiction in another world thing that DBD had going on for a while. And it's his departure which sends Adriana well and truly off the rails, as she pursues wealth first to support the family, and then simply for its own sakes. This setup is good. It's very similar to other killers with difficult relationships to their father like the Trapper, except the nature of her particular daddy issues, to put it crudely, are very different. While Archie Macmillan is a cruel and abusive tyrant who sees his son more as a tool to be wielded as he wishes, Saita Imai is a very normal, loving father, and it's the escalating instability and aggressiveness of his daughter that caused their relationship to take a dark turn. Simultaneously, Adriana is given a perfect Freudian excuse to justify her cruelty and harmful actions. Her father left her and it screwed her up significantly. But the same story also demolishes the excuse by showing us that she had violent tendencies and a habit of mistreating her employees that was around long before her father left. Like, he's exactly the kind of thing a real-life serial killer trying to deflect responsibility for their actions would say. And that same sort of reasoning has been used by defence attorneys across the world to get lighter sentences for perpetrators of real-life atrocities like school shootings. It's not their fault because their parents messed them up. Except we can obviously see in Adriana's case that isn't entirely true. I do like that while Saita leaving certainly wasn't a good thing for her daughter's development, the story doesn't try to pathologise her too much, because all that blaming her issues on her absentee father would do would be to detract from her own irrepressible evilness. And her story works at its best when you bear in mind that ultimately her decisions spring from her own ruthless self-interest first and foremost. The opening of her story sets the Skull Merchant up as someone who's always a bit of a bad seed, and who, through a series of unfortunate events, had these amoral, selfish tendencies amplified and rewarded until they spiraled out of control. The setup to Adriana as this cruel, pragmatic and selfish opportunist is extremely thorough. So you'd expect the payoff to be just as thorough, right? Well, here's where it all starts to go wrong, because it really isn't thorough at all. Once her father leaves, and she starts to get on her capitalist hellscape grind set, the story goes from laboriously tracking the blow-by-blow of her life to suddenly trying to speedrun through 15 plus years of her life without really explaining any of it. A great example here is when she's preparing her first murder. It says she rigged out a prototype drone to track her victims, but where did she get the drone from? Did she make it herself? If so, where did she learn engineering? Did she get someone at one of her companies to make it for her? And if so, who? And how did she get away with it? Wait, hang on, an egotistical and morally bankrupt CEO who implies they're very technically competent but provides zero evidence to us to prove that? Yeah, I'm sure that's happened before somewhere, but for the life of me I cannot think of where I've seen it before. Let me know in the comments if you can think of someone like that. How does she even lure two people who were obviously skeptical of her intentions into a corporate retreat in the Swiss Alps to begin with? These are all questions I'm dying to know the answer to, and if you read the story, you will be too. But does the story care about what you want? Absolutely the fuck not. It's that the writer came up with a gigantic story for the Skull Merchant that was the longest story in DBD history and covered her life in excruciating detail. But someone at Behaviour said, Zut alors, no, you cannot give her this story. C'est la poupou, le crack de le chien. It's so long that only that one British guy who autistically hyperfixates on our law for a living will actually read it. So instead of trimming the story down across the board, they just tore up most of Adriana's adult life, so that the part of her story that realistically should have been the first third ballooned to become over half the story. We know more about how her father lost his job at the canning plant in Fortaleza than we do about how she got her drones or her claw blades, and that feels like a massive missed opportunity. I think this is part of the reason why many of the people I've spoken to about this story do not care for it. And this lack of detail about her adult life reflects badly on Adriana's established character. Because a lot of attention is brought to her in the early stages of her life when her father was developing his manga, it makes the manga connections the later sections of the story maintain feel more important than they probably should be, and detracts from her core identity. A self-assured, cruel and fabulously wealthy serial killer, whose temperament is as cold and remorseless as the machines she builds in her service. I do understand why they decided to go for the manga angle. Brazil has a huge Japanese migrant population, with the country containing the most Japanese people of any country in the world besides Japan itself, and the otaku subculture is huge over there as a result, bigger even than it is in the United States. I appreciate Behaviour deciding to lean on that cultural angle while building Adriana's character, but if anything I wish it had leaned on it a little bit less, because focusing too much on it cheapens everything else about her. It's like if in Clown's story the entire thing was about his athletic pursuits that he took part in as a young boy, and his entire character story was defined by that one trait. Except he was still an overweight drug addict in his final design. I genuinely do not understand why they didn't play into her evil, manipulative rich bitch angle more closely in her story, and indulge the otaku elements of her design instead. Because that's a proven and tested source of some really good horror. The Purge and Hostel are great examples of stories where rich idiots who can afford to avoid consequences for their actions put on outlandish masks, costumes and weapons to go hunting the poor, the marginalised or just anybody they don't like simply because they can. And this is an angle that logically Adriana's story should play into, but it just doesn't seem to give itself the room to do so properly. which leaves the killer feeling kind of disjointed at the end of the day. The painful part of this entire missed opportunity is that I can see what they wanted to do. It's right there, clear as crystal. Behaviour wanted this utterly confident, tech-savvy, and murderously megalomaniacal businesswoman, whose cruelty and ego drew her to become a twisted mockery of her father's creations. It's a brilliant core character that could have been received just as well as DBD's other memorable psychopaths, like Trickster, Doctor, or Clown, but ultimately got squandered by the story that starred her. Like trying to recreate the Mona Lisa with gel pens, crayons, and glitter glue, this beautiful work was marred by the way it was created. And this sadly doesn't just apply to her lore. But before we cover Adriana's visual design and how that relates to her lore and characterization, it's time to talk about Opera GX, a browser designed specifically for gamers who I'm pleased to have supporting the channel. Long-time viewers may need no introduction, but Opera GX have been my browser of choice pretty much since I started this channel, if not before, and their features can help you as much as they've helped me. Nobody likes to close their browser to play games properly, and Opera GX using 80% less RAM than a standard browser means that won't be an issue, something which you can check out for yourself using GX Control Panel that lets you keep track of your performance. With the GX Corner showcasing the release dates of new games as well as current free-to-play titles, it's convenient to keep up to date with what's new in gaming, and all of these tools and more are easily accessible and customizable to let you take control of your browsing experience. If you are interested in downloading Opera GX for free, you can find the download link in the description and pinned comment. It'll go a long way to supporting the channel and upgrading your browser experience at the same time, so if you're curious, do try it out. And on that note, let's go back to talking about the Skull Merchant. It's possible the Skull Merchant has one of the least widely appealing visual designs in Dead by Daylight, in part because she doesn't easily correspond to a particular type of horror subgenre that people can identify her with easily. Many people have compared her design to that of a typical tactical shooter, like Apex Legends or Rainbow Six Siege. And while I do see where they're coming from, kind of, I don't think I agree. I've always seen her more as a Daniel Craig era Bond villain. Think Safin from No Time to Die or Silva from Skyfall. A remorseless, wealthy monster with an eye for theatricality and a level of modern technology that, while probably plausible enough to stay out of true sci-fi territory, are definitely impractical and display their makers' egotism, wealth, and particular brand of megalomania. It's not enough to simply win for these sorts of villains. Their victory must be absolute and their enemies either spectacularly defeated or forced to watch helplessly at their conquest. Her visual design screams of that confidence. Her tactical hunting gear and shoulder-mounted claw blade managed to lean just heavily enough on modern technology and military conventions that looks like it could really exist, while also being completely impractical and absurd. It perfectly encapsulates Adriana's cold, self-assured cruelty in my opinion. The wrist blades are free of embellishments, but are also quite intimate weapons, best suited to use at very close ranges. And the servos that connect to her shoulder, along with the radar and drones of course, show off her fierce intellect and suggest a level of technical competence that unfortunately her lore doesn't actually show us. It's the rhinestone-encrusted half-gas mask that I know lost a lot of people, and in isolation, I really like it. Besides the fact that I just love gas masks on characters, the fact that it's so tastelessly bedazzled is a reminder that just because she's cold and calculating doesn't mean she has good taste. And rich people really aren't known for expressing their wealth in terribly subtle ways. It's an expression of Adriana's confidence through her wealth, just like how the rest of her costume is an expression of power through the tactical clothing and high tech. The problem resides in how these two elements aren't meshed together terribly well visually, despite both of them painting a pretty unified picture of this egotistical megalomaniac millionaire with more money than sense. Just like in her lore, this overall character works, but the way in which the character is expressed comes across as conflicting, visually confusing and off-putting. Something that becomes increasingly obvious when we look at Elite Cosmetic for her, where she has a bodysuit replete with some, shall we say, tactically positioned denim to create a far more outlandish and provocative look. And it comes with a mask that's less bedazzled and more practical looking than her base one, meaning we now have a practical base costume with a mask that suits it, and an outlandish glitzy mask with a bodysuit that fits it. You can kind of build or bear your own version of Adriana into the game, and both of them express who she is in different ways. It perfectly showcases both the strengths and weaknesses of the base design by showing how the different elements can be refined and improved on. I wonder if this is similar to what happened to Dredge, where Dredge's skeletal hands head option was originally going to be the base look for the character, but it got made into a cosmetic instead, that when you wear it, looks suspiciously like it should have always been there to begin with. I personally believe Adriana's base design gets across her personality well enough, but I know it could be better. And these cosmetics demonstrate that. So I don't blame anybody for being turned off by it. Or, for that matter, turned on. Because I know her design, animations, and especially the leaked skin have drawn some flack for sexualizing her. I just want to address that for a second. Don't get me wrong, Adriana is clearly meant to be attractive. There's no real disputing that, but a lot of people seem to be treating her like it's an inherently bad thing to be attractive. And to highlight why I don't think that's true, at least in her case, I want to discuss the difference between a sexy character and an objectified one. Objectification is turning the character into a sex object. Whether that's vandalising an existing character to flatten them down into a pure sex appeal, or creating a new one for that purpose. A great example here is Jill Valentine in Resident Evil 5, where she's given a tight catsuit, the mind control device is attached to her open cleavage, and she's frequently framed in the cutscenes and promotional art, with a lot of attention drawn to her arse and legs especially. There's no reason in the story for Jill to look like this. The mind control device doesn't have to go there. She doesn't have to dress like a Black Widow porn parody for any reason other than Capcom wanting to market to horny gamers. But not all sexy characters are designed like that. Bayonetta is the obvious example, but a great male example from the horror genre is Pablo in Season 3 of vs Evil Dead, where he's given plenty of time running around shirtless to flex his actor Ray Santiago's muscular body. Like Adriana, both of these characters are intentionally given attractive designs and features, but in none of these cases are they objectified. With a couple of exceptions, Bayo's attractiveness is usually presented as a source of empowerment for her, an expression of confidence and ego, and Pablo's shirtless scenes represent something similar. They mark his transformation from the meek and timid right-hand man to Ash he is in the first two seasons, into the confident brujo especial, capable of fighting evil on his own. And it's that newfound confidence that ultimately wins him Kelly's heart. All three of these characters are obviously sexy, and that's part of the point. But they're not objectified, and as long as Adriana's sexiness does not result in her objectification, what's the problem here? We're not Puritans making women go around in nuns' habits, and we certainly didn't police Vittorio anywhere near this much, despite him having absolutely no reason to look half as hot as he did. Adriana's design, similar to her lore, only really falls apart in implementation. The ideas that incorporate it are all solid, but some perplexing choices prevent it from fulfilling its true potential. But don't get me wrong, even if they had nailed the implementation, there's a good chance it wouldn't have been a massive success simply because of the theme that was chosen for her story and design in the first place. A lot of people wanted and expected Tools of Torment to be an explicitly sci-fi themed chapter. Between the recent introduction of Death White of VHS to massive acclaim by its player base of 4 people, to the teaser showcasing a skull covered in wiring and machinery, the players were ready for a cyborg or a robot, or something equally high-tech and out there, which made the final design of an ordinary woman with mostly modern-era technology quite underwhelming for them. The topic of a sci-fi or robot chapter in DBD really deserves its own video, and at some point soon it'll get one. But a lot of people seem to blame the Skull Merchant for not being the kind of character that they wanted and expected. And I can't help but think that blame needs to be reflected on to some degree. It's okay to be disappointed that you didn't get what you were looking for. But that doesn't mean the chapter that brought it has done something wrong. If you're going to throw a hissy fit and demand that this gets reworked and that gets deleted, because it doesn't fit with the expectations that you built up, that is not a problem with the chapter, that is a problem with you. Not everything has to be for you, and that's okay. When Wesker released in Dead by Daylight, I made no secret that I didn't like him, and nor did I like the game that he came out in either. I have very strong opinions about RE5, and would much rather have seen a different character take his place as the second Resident Evil killer. But did I make hyperbolic videos saying Project W was the worst chapter ever and that it should be basically deleted because I didn't get the killer I wanted? No, because I'm not 6 years old and I understand that the world doesn't revolve around me. I made it clear that Wesker was not my kind of killer, but I also acknowledged that he was never going to be. And I'm happy for the people who got what they wanted, even if it wasn't what I wanted. I urge everybody who's not happy with this chapter not being their robot dream to, by all means, criticise parts of this chapter that don't work. Hell, that's what a lot of this video has already been doing. But please, give Tools of Torment, and give me, the same grace I extended to Resident Evil Chapter 2 when that came out. Just because it isn't the chapter that you wanted, doesn't mean it's some fundamentally awful disaster zone that should just be written out of existence. And I'm saying that because it's almost exactly the kind of chapter that I wanted. You might expect this from a Saw fanboy like me, but I've always loved the use of machines in horror, but not as in like killer robots or anything. I'm far fonder of the machine that's used as a means of its creator's expression. Not the robot army, but the robot army led by the mad scientist who built them. Not just the torture machine, but the torture machine designed by a bitter and vengeful old man who built it especially to be your personal punishment. That's what Adriana and her technology are. They are an expression of her will and her character. The drones monitor her victims, staying back as she tracks their every move and manipulates them to just the right place, just as she manipulates the world of business that she rules with an iron fist. Despite their stripped-down hardware that reflects her corporate efficiency, they are adorned with skulls, a hint of Adriana's theatricality as she literally watches her victims through the eyes of death itself. And the final kill is not the drones, but by her own blade, so she can relish fully in that sense of superiority that comes with the thrill of the hunt and the spilling of blood at hunt's end. Adriana Imai is a ruthless corporate monster, with a blend of amoral pragmatism and egotistical megalomania that is perfectly nurtured and rewarded by the capitalist system she is bent to her will. The story does not blame anyone or anything for her actions besides herself. Every decision made, every stroke of the blade and the pen, reflects who she is and what she values. Conceptually, she's a truly fantastic killer, and in my eyes, damn close to perfect. And that is the most frustrating part. It's not her poorly paced lore, or her technically shonky animations, or her conflicting visual design, or her weak power that annoys me the most. It's knowing how close behaviour really came to making my perfect killer. They tried so hard and got so far, but in the end it didn't even matter. Even if it was executed perfectly, I don't think this idea would ever have been too popular, but that's not my problem. A concept this fundamentally fantastic did not deserve such a half-baked and shoddy implementation. And due to the extreme negative backlash this chapter has received, some of which I will admit is likely undeserving, I worry we'll never see a chapter like this, a chapter that speaks to me on a core level in a way that very few do these days, ever again. So, my closing thoughts. Do I really love the Skull Merchant? Do I really love the suit my friend made me? Honestly, yes, I think I do. Yes, she has her problems, but in my eyes, none of these problems are exactly a damning catastrophe. Yes, her power is weak, but it can and will be buffed. Yes, her design is bizarre and kind of disjointed, but that doesn't come at the cost of painting a complete picture of who she is. Yes, the lore spends way too much time indulging in the writer's fantasy that they're more clever than they are, but that doesn't invalidate how good the character at the core of the story is. The detail and the emphasis is all just in the wrong place. It doesn't mean she's a bad character, it just means there's more story left to be told. Yes, she has her problems, but what character doesn't? And I really like her anyway. I don't expect to change any made-up minds about this. And I don't expect you guys to really change my mind on this either. If you also like her, then great, welcome to the club. If you don't, then that's completely fine as well, I understand. But if you're typing up a 4,000 word essay in the comments telling me why I'm wrong and should feel bad, I do have a formal request. I spent 9 months putting up with everybody sucking Wesker's dick. Please just let me have this. And yeah, I know feeling positively about this character isn't terribly popular right now, but let me ask you a question. When has that ever stopped me before? It's tough for now. Okay, so that's my assembled thoughts on the Skull Merchant's lore and design, and it's been a video I've wanted to get right for so goddamn long now. I've been working on it for ages and I really do hope you enjoyed it. Soon I'll be covering the new survivors, Hanato and Thalita Lyra, so if you want to catch that, be sure to subscribe if you're not already and ring the notification bell so you don't miss the next upload. Special thanks as usual to my beautiful patrons who got to see this video and all my other videos a day early. If you want to join the patron gang, then by all means the link is in the description. Don't feel pressured to ever do so, but it helps to keep the lights on here and helps me do this for a living, so I massively appreciate any support you could throw my way. But speaking of support, many thanks to Opera GX, supporting this channel once again with a partnership I'm always happy to promote. If you feel like trying it out for yourself and upgrading your browsing experience, then my link is in the description and the pinned comment, and it means a lot if you took a look. Once again, thank you so much for watching this, sticking it out, and I'll see you in the next one. Ta-ta for now.